We're here today, obviously, with Don Cooney, interviewing him about his opinions and outlook on various environmental issues, social issues, and other things dealing with the upcoming election. I think I'd like to start off, Don, tell us a little bit about yourself and, in a broad sense, what you're hoping to accomplish in this election.
Sure. Okay, Joe, thanks for having me, first of all. Well, okay, I've been teaching here at Western for the last 33 years. I teach in the School of Social Work. I've been a city commissioner here in Kalamazoo for the last 13 years. But all my life, I've been an activist working for social justice in many different venues. I lived 6 years in one of the poorest communities in the United States in Brooklyn, New York, and worked as a community worker there. I lived in some very racially tense areas of Philadelphia and organized communities there. I did a lot of international work, especially around South Africa for a dozen years with Nelson Mandela's African National Congress. Did a lot of things in Central America, lived in Nicaragua for a while and worked with some organizers down there. So I think I've had the best of both worlds. I got an excellent education. I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. I teach courses on social welfare and social policy and community organizing, which is really the kinds of decisions that I would have to make as a congressman. And I got a lot of street experience previously and now that I continue to work on the streets of Kalamazoo. So, you know, one thing that I see is that many of the problems that ordinary people, ordinary families face can only be solved right now by action at the national level. And that's why I'm running for Congress, because I believe that we need a voice in there who's going to speak up for ordinary people and who's going to fight to help people who are losing their jobs, losing their homes, losing their health care, and young people who are wondering how they're going to pay for their education and what kind of jobs are going to be out there when they graduate. That's the kind of stuff I've been working against, trying to help people get a decent life, because I think that's what this country should be about, and that's why I'm running for Congress.
All right, sounds great. You know, you definitely touched on some interesting things. And I think we'll get to a lot of the stuff that you talked about as we go on here. But the first thing I wanted to talk about, this is the question that I was asking about at the debates on agriculture and federal agricultural policy. And this is something that, as a congressperson, if you are in Washington, this is something that you actually have a chance to impact. And it's something that a lot of food activists, you know, we don't have a real opportunity to touch on this. And basically, I mean, as you are aware, I'm sure, because you know a lot about history of policy and stuff through social welfare and all that, the ag policy since the 50s has basically been this fence row to fence row, industrialized, very monoculture crops. We're going to plant nothing but corn for acres and acres and acres, and we're going to use pesticides, and we're going to use everything. And it's consolidated the market into a very few hands. There's a really interesting stat. Basically, the meat market back in the old trust-busting days, around the turn of the century, what led to trust-busting legislation was that 53%, this is a rough estimate, 53% of the market on meat was held by 5 companies. Now we've got 83% of the market held by 4 companies, and nothing's being done. So my question to you is, do you think this is a problem, this kind of consolidation and this industrialization of the food system? And, you know, what would be your path out of it?
You know, that's a real difficult question, and it's not my area of expertise, but I do know some things about this. First of all, I am very concerned about the concentration of control in such few hands in the very basic thing that we need to survive, which is food, control of seeds, control of these mass markets, what happens to animals, animal right things. I have a nephew in Philadelphia who's one of the leading animal rights guys in the country, and he keeps me up on the terrible things that are happening to animals in these factory farms and what they're doing to communities, the runoff from the waste into the waters and all those kinds of things. I just think that's really terrible stuff. And the waste of energy when we transport food from across the country or across the world when that food could be grown right here in our community. I mean, Michigan especially has a tremendous potential. And in the past, we've lived up to that. And for producing food and fruits, we're one of the leading areas in the world that can do that. And we're not capitalizing on that. Yeah. I think it should be about local production, healthy diets, producing food that is accessible to people, and small farmers. I think there's a lot of evidence that it's better for the soil when we vary the crops, that we can save huge amounts of energy if we eat locally, and that we can support local farmers. I go to the farmers market on a regular basis in Kalamazoo when they're open. And it's wonderful, the relationship that you build up with the people there. And you know that what you're getting there is healthy. And you're keeping the money in the local market. And I just think all those things are so important. How do you put all that together? I'm not sure. But I think that we have to have some principles. And I think locally grown, promote local, eating local, buying local. That's one thing. I think moving away from all the pesticides and all the kinds of stuff that we're dumping in our fields that are tremendously harmful. Doing something about incentives for local people to get involved in buying locally. So I think all those things are involved in it.
Okay, so housing and building codes.
Right.
Clearly another thing that either at the state or the federal level you do have some control over. And so there's a lot with LEED certification for buildings, and then also not just building codes per se, but also, the government has a huge influence with their power of the purchase, basically. So when they decide to build their buildings, right now there's just an article about how they're green roofing the town hall here in Kalamazoo. And then I was just reading another article about how the mayor of New York just painted his millionth square foot of rooftop white. Wow. And so what's your outlook on that? Do you see the need for more stringent building codes? Do you see a need for encouraging people through tax breaks or subsidies? How would you kind of get building codes up to snuff? Because it seems like they haven't really changed for quite a while.
Well, I talked to some of your colleagues in SSE, and they made it very clear to me that we don't need more energy. We need to be more efficient with the energy that we have now, and especially in the building codes that we have nationally. Now, this is kind of tricky because building codes are traditionally local control, but you can give incentives. For example, I just saw that the new school that was built in Kalamazoo Public Schools, they just got a $47,000 rebate because they've made it so energy efficient and heating efficient that the federal government gave them an incentive to encourage that kind of building. They couldn't give it straight to the schools for some reason. They had to give it to the architect, and then they gave it to the schools. But that whole point about that, look, the stakes are really high. We have to do something about conserving energy. Conserving energy and renewable resources are the whole key to our energy policy. And we know how to do these things now. We know how to make buildings more hot in the winter and more cool in the summer. We know how to we know how to deal with electricity and things like that. So I think the federal government has to give incentives to people and encourage them to do that.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, efficiency. I think it's some 70% of the energy used in buildings is wasted. Wow. So, it's a huge area it's low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
It doesn't require some new technology. It's not something like, in 10 years we'll have the technology to do this. We've got it now. We just need the will to do it, basically.
Yeah, I think that's so important.
So it's good to hear that you're at least knowledgeable and interested in this. The response from other candidates is our consumption is going to go up 20%.
Yeah, I know.
And
Fred says that all the time. We're going to need 5 times as much.
Says who? It's going to go up 20%. Right. What is that? What does that even? And that's something I really want to ask him. It's like, what are you basing that on? Are you saying we're going to have 20% more gadgets? Our houses are going to get 20% bigger? Because to me, that doesn't look like the way things are going. There's new studies coming out all the time that young people are more interested in having apartments than houses. They're more interested in having iPods than cars.
Right.
So I question this kind of blanket statement of, oh, we're going to need 20% more electricity no matter what, and so that means we have to, rapidly ramp up our production. It's like, well, why don't we work on efficiency first?
I think efficiency is a tremendous key, and I think China's catching on to this too. And in their new buildings, they're really encouraging and enforcing building standards that are going to be more environmentally responsible. And, the big worry is China and India expanding and growing in all they're doing. But they're learning that they need to do this, and they're making great strides, and it's actually, in some ways, way better than we're doing.
Yeah, exactly. You might not always, or at least I don't always agree with the kind of the means, but
exactly.
It's very totalitarian,
exactly.
It's very iron-fisted, but they're getting the job done.
Yeah.
And so we're America. We can figure out how to do this in a way that's going to be, a little more user-friendly.
I think, I really favor giving government support. I'll give you an example. In the last house I lived in, I lived there for 23 years, and during the Carter administration, I put solar panels on my roof way back in 1979. And I did that, and I got 70% of the cost of that rebated. There's a program in the state now that I just heard about where they're just doing this on a small scale, where they will install solar panels on your home free, and you will pay that back with the money that you save on energy. So they'll do it for free.
And that's a state program?
It's a state program.
That only makes 100% sense. I've heard of various private groups that are doing this. It's very similar, where it's like, we're Corporation X, and we'll put solar panels on your roof. And you pay for that over the span of the existence of those panels through your energy savings. And so, I didn't realize that Michigan was doing that at the state
They're doing
level.
it on a small scale, on a trial basis, and everybody's doing better with that.
Yeah.
That's good for the state, it's good for the people, it's good for everybody.
Yep.